Lame duck president may be considering pardons for himself, his pals, and his family members. Those pardons don't provide protections against any charges at the state or local level. And there's a lot of reporting to suggest that significant legal trouble awaits Trump once he's out of office and no longer immune from prosecution. Joining our conversation, David Cay Johnston. He's a tax expert, a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative reporter, and author of the book, The Making of Donald Trump. Andrew Weissman is still with us. I want to understand what you both think Donald Trump understands, you first, David, about his exposure in these New York investigations.
Oh, Donald knows very well, Nicole, that he is likely to be indicted on business, insurance, banking, and tax fraud by the state of New York. And let's remember, he has been tried twice civilly for tax fraud and lost both cases. And he was shown in one of those cases to be a forger. Donald knows that these are very dangerous cases for him, but there's nothing he can use his pardon power for because it's only useful for offenses against the United States, that is, federal charges.
David,
he's very worried.
So this is so interesting to me. A Trump ally said to me in the days after the election when Trump refused to concede that he will engage in this grift, taking small dollar donations from his own voters because he's worried about the legal bills that await him on the other side. And I guess my question for you is what engages the entire Republican establishment in what is basically Donald Trump's legal defense fund campaign?
Well, these small donors, and apparently it's mostly small donors to this fund, didn't read the fine print. He can use the money to subsidize his lifestyle and pay for lawyers rather than trying to get courts to overturn the election, which has totally and completely failed, as we all knew that it would from the get-go. But what Donald has done is hijacked the Republican Party, and he's used his bullying power and his popularity with people who don't understand who he really is, that he's the third-generation head of a four-generation white-collar crime family, to intimidate Republicans. He's turned the elected Republican leadership into moral jellyfish, blind, spineless, and adrift in the chaos that Trump creates.
You know, Andrew, I just keep thinking about, and I said this in the last block, people that you worked with in law enforcement and at the Justice Department that have described every brush with Donald Trump's inner circle as feeling like meeting with a mob family. And I want to put the same question to you. I mean, what do you think allows someone who acts like part of a organized crime family in the way he bullies and intimidates and obstructs investigations that come anywhere close to him or his family? What do you think gets the entire Republican establishment to be part of his basically bouncer crew?
So, when I first heard Jim Comey describe the president as a mob boss, I chalked that up to hyperbole and sort of threw that off. And, the more that was before the special counsel investigation, and the more I've been exposed to what he's done, both as a criminal prosecutor and then just as a citizen, I actually realized I was wrong, that he engages in much of the same type of behavior. Obviously not the sort of, overt violence. So, there isn't that analogy. I think the answer is, power and fear. And he is really talented at wielding that. I wanted to quickly, Nicole, follow up on something that I thought was really interesting, which is in addition to the state tax liability, it's worth noting that Donald Trump has limited ability to protect himself even at the federal level. It's not clear that a self-pardon is going to be constitutional, assuming that the Attorney General, the new one, wants to test that. And you cannot pardon yourself for future crime. And one of the things that Donald Trump and his family are going to have to do on tax day is they're going to have to file tax returns. And if you are worried about, your prior tax crimes, you have a real decision to make. Are you going to continue fudging your tax returns? Are you going to not file, which itself can be a crime?
Right.
Or are you going to tell the truth? And if you tell the truth on those tax returns, you may be handing a conviction to the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, because that's going to have an evidentiary value as in terms of how you now described your assets since you had those assets before. So they're going to have a real, they're going to be in a real pickle, to use a legal term.
To use a legal term, I can understand. So, David, this is what I wanted to ask you about. I mean, Michael Cohen testified before Congress exactly how they operationalized the fraudulent telling of Donald Trump's worth and his losses. I think he basically testified that he inflated it when he wanted to buy the Buffalo Bills, and he deflated it when he wanted to pay less for insurance and other expenses for the business. How does he circle the square, if you will, on what Andrew Weissman just said? He will not be protected from any crimes he commits after January 20th. What do his taxes look like next year?
Well, he might try to invent a time machine. Other than that, he's got real problems. And I want to encourage people watching the show to read Andrew's book. He does a terrific job, particularly in the area of pardons, of laying out how Donald Trump wielded the possibility of a pardon to interfere with law enforcement. And while Andrew has flipped people in criminal cases, I've flipped lots of people for the newspapers in getting them to confess to wrongdoing and felonies, including murder. And it is a delicate dance. And I can't imagine if you had in the background the prospect that if you played ball, you'll get a pardon. And let's remember one other thing. Donald once wrote a letter on behalf of a major international cocaine trafficker, and I believe Donald was in business for this guy, urging the judge to go light on him. But read carefully, the letter really said, don't rat me out, protect me, and I'll take care of you. And the public record shows, as I reported in my biography, boy, did Donald take care of this guy.
You know, I want to give you a second, Andrew Weissman, to explain just how the dangling of pardons in front of Paul Manafort and Mike Flynn, which I think that was done by the summer of 2017. There was reporting that John Dowd had had discussions or discussed pardons with at least some of their attorneys, and there was a lot of musical chairs and turnover. But I remember that being at least in the water in terms of the news coverage of the earliest phases of the Mueller probe. How did that impede your ability to get to the truth?
So here's a classic example, Paul Manafort. Paul Manafort gets convicted in the first trial in Virginia. He's facing decades in jail. He's facing a second trial in D.C., really strong proof. And you would think in that situation, you would truly cooperate. That's what you normally would do to try and lessen the amount of time you do in jail. And instead, he purported to cooperate, but as the court found, he actually told a whole series of lies to us. And you have to ask yourself, what's the reason for that? The reason for that is that you are hoping that you will get your payday in a different way, that you are going to be pardoned. Rick Gates had the same dilemma of, do you come in and cooperate and try and reduce your criminal exposure? Or do you say, you know what, I don't really have to worry about that because I can get a pardon? And Roger Stone is probably the classic case of that, where we know it worked, which is Roger Stone goes to trial, is convicted by a jury beyond a reasonable doubt of all crimes, and doesn't do a day in jail because basically he says, I will keep my lips sealed if I get a pardon, and his sentence was commuted and he didn't go to jail. So all of those are ways of keeping the truth from the government, because you never get the benefit of truthful information from those witnesses.
It's unbelievable. David Cay